After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign.
Tiffany Onyejiaka.
Tiffany Onyejiaka has joined a conference.
Hi, Tiffany. It's Bob Fleischner.
Hi, it's Tiffany.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not sure whether Sandy's joining us or not. I also invited Diane Smith-Howard to join, but I don't know if she can join either. So
Okay.
why don't we just start and see if anybody else wants to tell me what I might be able to help you with.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, are you comfortable if I record this conversation?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to double check. Just for like a very brief overview. So, all for the month of October, Teen Vogue's been having a series called Kids Incarcerated, which is kind of bringing awareness about juveniles in the justice system and some of the challenges they face. And so the article I'm working on is related to kind of healthcare for juveniles in the justice system, because that's a very, it's a topic that isn't really talked about, but is extremely, extremely important. I actually remember taking a class
Has joined a conference.
about prison healthcare, but I never really got to learn too much about what it's like for juveniles. So the point of this article is kind of to raise awareness about some of the challenges it's faced and some of the inadequacies in the health system that hopefully can be fixed very soon. So with that in mind, the very first question I'll try and keep this as short as possible. Over the years, what do you think are kind of the most common mental health care inadequacies you've kind of noticed in juvenile justice cases over your time working as an attorney?
Okay. So first, before I answer that, somebody just joined?
It's Sandy.
Oh, hi, Sandy. Sandy, this is being recorded, so just so you know. Sandy, this is Tiffany from Teen Vogue. And Sandy's a lawyer who works with me, Tiffany, and does juvenile and criminal justice stuff as well as lots of other things.
Hi.
Answer to the question is what's the most common mental health service problems in juvenile justice facilities. They probably fall into a number of categories. One is the inadequacy of screening when youth come into facilities. And by screening, I mean screening for both the presence of mental health problems and of possible suicidality. So screening is the first. The second is the lack of adequate mental health staff to provide mental health services. So either medication or counseling or groups or whatever services are deemed to be are necessary. Third is the inadequacy of suicide prevention protocols in many facilities, so that there is not an appropriate approach to either noticing the possibility of suicide or responding to it. The fourth is the mental health impacts of the overuse of segregation or seclusion or isolation, whatever it's called. So the children and youth are left alone in their rooms for periods of time. And the fifth is the inadequacy of discharge planning to appropriate community-based mental health. So those are at least five of the problems that I've seen. They vary enormously, state to state, facility to facility. One place might have a very good suicide policy or a very good isolation policy or not use isolation, but still have inadequate mental health staff. So it varies. I don't know if Sandy, if there's anything you think I've left out.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I guess going along with that question, I know that I was looking up kind of the budgets for juvenile justice systems. I'm from Maryland, and I know that in Maryland it's about, I think, like 60 million or so a year. Do you think that there's not enough funding to kind of give the juveniles the proper health care? Do you think it's just that there's enough funding, but it's not being allotted correctly? Or do you think there are other reasons that are kind of the underlying reason why there's so much kind of inadequate mental health care treatment for these youth?
Well, I'm not sure I know the right answer to that. I think the first thing is that whatever the budgets are for placing youth into locked facilities, they're probably too high because that kind of detention is unwarranted in many cases, and is harmful in almost every case. But whether within the budgets themselves, because there are too many kids who are locked up, that's the point. But within the budgets, I think it would vary from location to location, even within states, from county to county, or from area, region to region. There are, in terms of the accessibility of staffing, there are a number of difficulties that the facilities face. A lot of juvenile facilities are in very rural areas. So for instance, in New York, they'd be in upstate New York. And very hard often to hire qualified mental health staff in sparsely populated parts of the states. So sometimes the problem that you hear about from administrators is we'd like to hire more, we'd like to have a psychiatrist, or we'd like to have another psychologist, or we'd like to have some clinical social workers, but there aren't any. Or there aren't any who will work here. Or there are so few in the area that it's impossible to recruit. So I think that's one factor. Another factor is that I think the jobs are not, at least for some professionals, are not attractive. The facilities are, many of the facilities are old. There is a tension in many facilities between clinical and security needs, and in most instances, the security needs trump the clinical needs, and that may be uncomfortable for some clinicians. The pay varies. Sometimes the pay is pretty good, sometimes not so good. That may be a factor. So I think that it is a difficulty recruiting, even when the facility or the state recognizes that its staffing is inadequate.
Okay. That makes sense. Another question I had is that, because I was speaking to somebody else who also works with juvenile justice, and they mentioned that a lot of the youth who get arrested are youth that already had mental health disorders. And I know that there's a pretty big school-to-prison pipeline where there are kids who are actually getting arrested in their high schools. Do you think that if do you think there's any way kind of schools, and I guess I don't even know if community-based clinics could kind of make an impact with mental health treatments over there, and that might be able to help kind of, I don't know, prevent a lot of these youths from entering the justice system in the first place? Or do you think that schools and community-based clinics could have any kind of impact on lessening the severity?
I don't know if Sandy can respond to this also, because we're litigating, and she's litigating a case that involves the school-to-prison pipeline. I think it's fair to say that both Sandy and I agree, along with almost everybody else who works in this field, that the schools are feeding the juvenile justice system, that there is a massively disproportionate number of students with mental health and other disabilities who are subject to not only limited to high schools. We've represented youth who are in elementary school and were arrested and placed in the juvenile justice system. And it's very common in at the middle school level, too. So I don't think there's any question that the schools in many districts are feeding too many kids into the juvenile justice system. And disproportionately among those students who are being fed into the juvenile justice system are students with emotional disabilities. There are a number of cases that have tried to address this, and there are a number of efforts among foundations and advocacy groups to try to lessen the impact of the school to prison pipeline. But it's real and it's serious, and the schools many schools have delegated discipline to police officers in ways that are both unnecessary and harmful. There's pretty good evidence that even one day in detention is a very negative predictor of future involvement in the juvenile justice and criminal justice systems, and of all of the ancillary impacts. So, I think schools need to find a way, working with mental health systems and mental health providers, to provide better mental health care, either in the school or made available to students, better behavioral interventions, more attention to whether behaviors are manifestations of emotional problems, better trauma training, better behavioral intervention plans, better behavioral analysis, and so on, in order to try to keep students out of and away from the juvenile justice system, where they don't belong.
Okay.
Anything you want to add to that, Sandy?
Yeah, I think adding the sort of point in the second question with the answer in the third question, when Bob references, different states where these initiatives are in place to try to minimize the school-to-prison pipeline, there have been allies when fiscal notes are attached to these various legislative initiatives, and the allies have come from the unlikely places where people want to save money because it's so expensive to run that school-to-prison pipeline. And the things that Bob just outlined don't necessarily cost more in the long run than sending everybody, relying on police as the enforcers in schools.
Okay. That makes sense. I guess kind of one of the last questions I have, it's kind of a big question, but kind of in your opinion, what do you think must be done for this transformation to happen? But also, in your opinion, what do you think kind of a young person, someone who maybe is still in high school or college, or maybe they're still in professional school, can actually do to kind of make an impact on this topic? I don't really hear it being talked about too much in politics, so I don't know how much voting will make a difference, but I was wondering if you had any kind of advice for young people who might read this and might be like, I want to do something to kind of help the situation, because it's pretty bad. And there's a lot of research showing it's bad, but there's not a lot of conversation about it.
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen with students who we've represented, and they've all been students with emotional disabilities, that they've been bullied, and that a substantial amount of their behavior that gets them into trouble in the school is a result of a reaction to bullying. And I think that bullying can only be stopped if young people work together to stop it. So I think one thing that would help enormously is young people enlisting themselves in campaigns to end bullying. Second thing that I think that students can do is, and young people can do, is to use whatever existing student government or student council or student participation or PTA or parent groups or whatever exists to try to raise the issue with school officials and with school boards about bullying and about the way that discipline, in particular, the way that discipline is carried out in schools. Third thing I think that young people can do is there is an enormous, as I'm sure you've been finding in preparing this article, there's an enormous amount of data. And I think that student groups working together with other community groups can use the data that's out there to convince school administrators, school officials, parents, and others of primarily of overused severe discipline and the very negative impact that discipline, that the wrong kinds of discipline, and that extreme discipline, by which I mean suspensions, expulsions, removals, restraints, isolation, arrest, all of those things as forms of discipline, that they have very, very negative consequences. And we've found that there's a surprising, to us anyway, a surprising lack of information about this among many school officials, and even when they are informed, a sense of denial that it's happening in their schools or that what they're doing is anything but terrific. And so I think that that's something. The final thing is I think that this relates to the bullying is I think that young people have to integrate people with disabilities into their schools, into their activities, and into their lives in ways that I think they will find rewarding, not only for the children with their disabilities, but for themselves.
Okay.
I wish I could think of the name of those that film about those kids in New Haven, Bob, who, they're a really good example. There's a documentary film about them where they had perceived that they were being disciplined for things that didn't amount to crimes, and they were trying to determine if this was a trend or if it was, an anomaly. And they, not in those words, but that's what they were looking at. And they ended up doing requests for documents from the state to try to get this data, and they learned that the data didn't exist, that it wasn't collected. And I think as a result of this film, of these students, they ended up, in Connecticut anyway, collecting data in a way that you could watch the trends, and the trends were just what the kids suspected. But that film is a really good example of what kids can do in terms of, seeing what's happening in their own school and doing some. Remember the name of that film, Bob? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
It was really good. I'll try to find it. I could email it to you if I find it.
Okay. Well, those were the 6 questions I had wanted to ask you. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you think you'd want to say or you think would be relevant for the American public to know about this topic, other than what I've asked you all about already?
I've told you everything I know.
Okay.
And I don't have anything to add to Bob. I just did what I thought.
Okay.
We can suggest some other people you'd like to talk. I don't know whether you've found enough people to talk to, or we've worked. Andy and I have worked with lawyers in several states. So if you're interested in Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, in particular, I can give you contact there, mostly in the South, and a national contact, Diane Smith-Howard at National Disability Rights. But you may have more than enough people you've talked to already.
I think for now, I've talked to quite a few people. So I think for now, I think I have enough, but I really do appreciate you offering up your contacts. I really do appreciate that.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right.
When do you expect your article to be?
Well, I'm sending the draft to my editor tonight, so I'm hoping that it could hopefully be up by probably like Saturday or Sunday, but it definitely should be up by like worst case scenario next Tuesday. And I'll definitely email you the link as soon as it goes up, so you don't have to worry about like searching for it online.
Okay, thanks. I'm not a regular reader of Teen Vogue, I have to admit.
Yeah, it's fine. It's just a series they just started. This is the first time they're doing it ever. If you have any spare time, read any of the other articles. They have some really, really good quality ones about juvenile and the justice system, ranging from disabilities to school prison pipeline to kind of what happens when a kid dies in jail. Like, it's some really good stuff.
Well, I do read Vogue. Not a great.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read Teen Vogue. I'll take a look at those.
Okay.
Appreciate your getting.
Good luck with your story.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Has left the conference.